Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another discussion video. This time it's going to be about the patch notes that were just released for 3.0. I believe they were released in the early morning, August 2nd, and there's quite a lot of notes there. We're not going to be going through all the notes, especially since most of the notes are in one way or another old because we've already had access to the changes in the beta. They just haven't updated the actual patch notes since 2.6. So all the changes that they've made, even at the start of the beta, are going to be in those patch notes. So a lot of stuff to kind of talk about there. We're not going to be going over all of it. Just going to be going over, I think, some of the more key points, speaking in general terms, getting a little bit specific in some cases. And honestly, I got to tell you, I'm pretty disappointed overall, I think, with the 3.0 changes. And I know I'm probably going to get flamed, but before I get into the negatives, I will start with, I guess, the positives, which is that we are getting two more new acts, basically acts 9 and 10, and we already got 3 new acts essentially. The thing is, for me, the acts aren't really super incredible, I guess, in terms of, like, I don't really feel overwhelmingly happy that the game has been changed in that way. It's nice that we don't have to repeat through the content anymore, but honestly, I just don't really mind because I play the game for testing characters and endgame maps anyways, so the leveling up content is kind of irrelevant. The biggest thing rather, that I'm curious to see about Acts 9 and 10 is like maybe some of the new bosses, and if those bosses get implemented into new maps and stuff like that. So I'll be looking out for that if there's any bosses that have some really cool mechanics, like Dodre had some cool mechanics in Act 8. So there's still some stuff to be potentially surprised about and happy about, but it's just not something that I really go crazy over. I'm much more into the systems and the actual mechanics of the game, and that's where I feel like they've let down with 3.0 because they've made a lot of content for sure. Even if some of it's just changing the tile set around a bit, they've definitely added quite a bit more content, but it's really the systems that I've been let down by. So now that we've got the positive out of the way, let's get into the negatives. And the first thing on the list is pretty much the ailments changes. So previously in 2.6, ailments were incredibly strong, and in some cases they were pretty much the only thing you'd want to build around for a certain type of damage or skill. And obviously that's bad to a degree. So I think everybody expected fairly significant nerfs because you're getting pretty insane numbers with the double dipping and stuff like that. Personally, how I thought the nerfs were going to go was that instead of being able to build around the ailments themselves, you were going to do more initial damage with skills up front, and then they were going to, like, the ailment component like poison, bleeding, and ignite were going to do still a substantial amount of damage, but you couldn't scale that damage into infinity, and you wouldn't use the same multipliers basically to scale the initial damage and the dot damage after. So that's kind of how I thought they were going to approach this. And that way you'd end up with a skill where you still feel the impact of the dot, but you're not just straight building around the dot, and the initial hit is important too. It seems like what they did, though, is they just kind of allowed you to scale the ailments, the secondary portion, or the secondary damage elements of the skill, but it's just the scaling is quite awful right now, so they really do like hardly any damage. You'll see poison, bleed, and ignite, I'm pretty sure, in most cases just in a terrible, terrible state. I think Mathil it was on a stream, and he tried making like a 200 and some point 10 link bleed character and could only get it to like, what is it, like 400k bleed or something with a new bleed keystone. Picking assassin, I think it was, or something like that. So that's pretty ridiculous, ridiculously bad. And yeah, I feel like obviously a nerf was needed, but when you just make them so bad that they're not even usable anymore, it's like, why even have them in the first place, right? So it seems like they really don't know what they're doing just in terms of how to balance these mechanics, and it's really challenging them because when they first came out, they were obviously super OP, and then they can't get the numbers right now after they've had kind of a while because the double dipping has been in the game for, pretty much since its onset, I guess, and it's gotten more, like, as they've added more skills and more interactions into the game, it's gotten kind of like worse and worse. So they've kind of had definitely a long time I think at least like a good year and a half since this has become popular, or probably at least a year, to kind of investigate this and see what's going on, and then make changes and balance the numbers into a way where the ailments are still functional. But it just seems like they can't do it. So yeah, I'm not really expecting too much from ailments in the future, and really disappointed in the state they're in now. So I guess I won't be playing any of those. Moving on to the second point, ascendancies. So pretty disappointed with ascendancies. Assassin was just absolutely gutted. That might be the most egregious change so far, I think. Um, I don't understand why toxic delivery was nerfed. I don't even understand why the crit portion of assassin was nerfed. Deadly infusion. I mean, and you've basically taken the only two good branches of the assassin and you've nerfed them into the ground, because the other ambush branch is pretty awful in my opinion, especially considering how terrible the synergy is with the crit portion, because you're pretty much always going to be at crit cap when you take the crit branch of the assassin. So the ambush portion is just pretty redundant in most cases, and yeah, so now just everything about the assassin pretty much feels terrible, because it gives you crit, but that's the only thing it gives you, literally. Like, it doesn't give you any utility, really, or any damage in any other areas. So assassin just feels terrible. And not only did we see nerfs like that, but we didn't really see any buffs to any of the terrible ascendancies, right? So Deadeye is in a terrible place right now, I think. They actually gave Farshot to Lionized Glare, which seems like it's going to be a really good bow in the next expansion, or in this expansion coming up. So why you would ever go Deadeye now, I have no idea. It's just hilariously bad. Seems like they nerfed Pathfinder a bit. I think mostly, or rather, they nerfed the flash nodes that reduce the dying sun, so that's different. But I'm trying to think what else they really touched. They buffed Hierophant like a little bit, and to me it was just laughable, because any build you're going to do before on Hierophant is not really going to get any significant power boost from the changes, right? I'm not going to go out and say that Hierophant, just like you could probably find a use for Deadeye, right? Like you can probably find a use for Hierophant. I've seen some people make builds with that new helm, with like the auto casting and stuff, where they use Mind Over Matter. Like they're using a lot of weird regen mechanics there, and you know that stuff is cool, but that's probably going to be like your only build that Hierophant is really going to be necessary for. You know, there's no really other reason why you'd want to pick Hierophant. It just seems like it's in a really bad place right now. Yeah, just pretty much weird changes across the board, and not enough changes to awful ascendancies. So, just pretty confused there. Skill gems, it's kind of more the same. It's like just we're getting nerfs to some skills, right? And then I think the only skill that really got like a significant buff was Glacial Cascade. But the problem with Glacial Cascade is it just doesn't clear very well anyway. So I'm not really sure how many people are going to be playing Glacial Cascade builds. I think the Mine build is really the only viable build. In terms of like playing Self-Cast or something like that, or on Totems, it's pretty terrible from what I've tested. I think Mine is like literally the only viable way to play Glacial Cascade. So yeah, I was expecting, like, there's so many bad skill gems in this game still, and I was just expecting little tweaks at least. Even something like Shockwave Totem, like, if they would reduce the mana cost on it, right, that would be huge. The mana cost on Shockwave Totem is way too high for the damage it does or doesn't do, I would say. And, yeah, it would just be huge if they did something small like that, but they didn't even bother to do, like, the simplest things. And this is why when Chris made that post a few weeks ago, or like a week ago, I think, when he responded to the community's outrage over the charge changes, and it seemed like he was getting pretty defensive. He's like, oh, we hire, like, you know, people who've gotten 100 and they play this game a ton and all this stuff. And it's like, well, it doesn't really matter what you say in the post, because if, you know, if what you're saying in the post is not reflected in what you change in the game, then people don't really give a shit, or they're going to continue to make those assumptions. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things in this game that just need like little tiny tweaks that could be done I think my computer just okay. Hopefully we didn't cut out there, but yeah. So there's little tiny tweaks that could be done in tons of places in this game that would just make little things like way more viable, and it's been suggested on the forums like to ad nauseum. Like I've seen Shockwave Totem mana nerf suggestions all the time. I've seen suggestions to make reduced mana useful again. You know, there's just so many little tweaks they can make that would make a huge difference, and none of them even get done. We're not even talking about big things here. So, like Flame Totem, another skill. This is just like a forgotten skill now. It's basically just like terrible. Searing Bond, pretty terrible skill, even with the new burning damage change. It's just, and I think the frustrating thing is that you have skills like Barrage, where you just do the elemental conversion now, and yeah, you're not doing the crazy poison damage with them or whatever, but you're still doing like an insane amount of damage with this skill, and all the other skills compared to it are pretty awful. So like why would you ever use Frenzy, right? Nowadays, Frenzy used to be like a good single target attack back in the day. Now it's just completely been outpaced by everything, and it's literally only to get Frenzy charges. And most people aren't even getting Frenzy charges via Frenzy. They're using some other method. They're using like the Jewel, or they're using Raider, something like that, or Blood Rage. So yeah, I think there's just so much room for improvement. Movement skills are another thing when we're talking about skill gems. So like Wanders basically get fucked again with movement skills. Like I just don't understand. Like Lightning Warp is such a terrible skill. It is so bad. Like if you've played Diablo 2, it's not even close to the teleport in that game, and it takes 2 support gems and the skill itself to even make the skill like viable. So it takes up your entire like 3 link, and you can't even put anything cool in it. Like you can't even really put Arcane Surge in it because it reduces the duration of the like it's so retarded, right? Because you have to put reduced duration in addition to faster casting to make the skill even viable. So even if you put it in like a 4 link with Arcane Surge, it's like now you're just reducing the amount of time your Arcane Surge is up for. So yeah, it's just like it's crazy to me how there's just such a lack of good movement skills for people that use wands. It's kind of incredible. I don't know if it's like an intentional balance change because I feel like wands are too powerful, so they need to be slower. But Lightning Warp is just god awful, and Shield Charge is still king. And Whirling Blades is still good. There's been really no changes to that front, so pretty much the status quo. And yeah, I'm trying to think of any other real like noticeable skill change difference. The changes to the added damage gems was pretty nice. The added cold and stuff. That makes the added cold especially got buffed quite substantially. So that's really good. But I think that's one of the only skill gem buffs that I was like really excited about, because most of the other ones are just pretty bad. I think the Ice Nova one is very laughable, where it does like 40% more damage if triggered off the Frostbolt, because first of all, it's just a pain in the ass to do, and it like still doesn't even do enough damage, right? Like even with the 40% more, it's just bad. So it doesn't even clear, like if you would never use that over like let's say Freezing Pulse or Freezing Pulse Totem or something like that. It would just never be better. So again, like I just have no idea where they're going with these changes, right? Like that's something you can see so easily when you're making the change. So it's like, oh, if we give 40% more damage to Ice Nova, right? Well, you can just calculate very easily what 40% more damage would be, and then realize that it's still not enough to make this silly playstyle worthwhile. And then you'd be like, why bother making the change? We either need to do something else or need to increase the numbers even more. But you know, it just seems like they just decided 40% for some reason and then never bothered to test it or even like do the math out simply. So I think that this is why people are saying like you don't even play your own game or something like that, you know, because if they did play their own game, they would realize that some of these changes are just awful. The flash changes, another big thing. I'm kind of like don't even really care about that because most of them are just like minor nerfs. Flasks have been too powerful for a long time, and it looks like they're finally starting to do something, but they're just like not doing enough, which is weird because they'll go overboard when nerfing stuff like Assassin or the elements, but when it comes to the flask, they'll just like take a little bit off the top. So yeah, I don't really understand what's going on there, even though flasks are the most broken thing in this game, probably. It's kind of ridiculous. Um, the ES nerfs, we can talk about those a bit, I guess. Yeah, ES is pretty much non-viable now, except for like certain cases, like ED is probably still fine. Certain totem builds are probably still fine, but you're probably actually better off building most totem builds hybrid now, anyways, rather than full ES. And now you just get punished super hard for missing any type of big ES pieces. There was a build my cousin linked the other day. It was like kinetic blast totems or something, and the guy had like 9k ES. I think it was in 2.6, and he was using that shield that like gave him a ton of accuracy, or it gives you like a resolute technique basically. And it's just funny because that build probably had like 9k ES in that video. It's probably gonna have like 5k ES in 3.0, so you're gonna need to actually build it as life or something for it to even be viable, because at this point it would just be terrible. You just wouldn't have enough ES. So yeah, ES just pretty much gutted. Life didn't really get much of a buff, so now things are just way more dangerous. Oh, let's talk about the boss HP nerf, yeah, or the boss HP buff. So basically, bosses are just now like really annoying to do because they've cut the damage down in the game substantially. I feel like especially on skills that are high clear speed skills, they've cut down the boss damage in some way quite substantially. So I think what you're going to see happen is just nobody's going to do the bosses aside from getting the map credit. So good job there. I mean, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, we've seen no even like a remote increase in terms of like what the boss, or we haven't even seen hardly any increase in terms of like the bosses dropping better loot or anything like that, right? So there's no incentive to do the bosses because now their HP is doubled. They still drop probably the same loot, and even if they dropped way more loot, honestly, I feel like they'd have to drop an absurd amount of loot to make this worth it, or they'd have to do something equally absurd, like make them drop a map every time or something ridiculous. So you just run into this problem when you try and make changes like this, where it's one or two absolutes, right? Like the player is either going to do the boss because it's going to be worth it, or they're not going to do the boss. And when you push that HP marker past a certain line, it just becomes not worth it anymore. So, and I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about. I don't think there's really that many more changes. But yeah, I just think build diversity is just gonna be kind of crushed. Oh, yeah, righteous fire totems apparently got super nerfed in the beta, or the last patch notes, because it's like now totems have 45% less health and they take 45% less damage. Apparently this kills Dark Pact totem builds as well, so those two things are out the window. So just basically killing more builds. We've already killed a ton of builds going into 3.0, but we're just going to keep killing more, I guess, because why not? So I guess have fun playing like SRS or something, or Barrage in 3.0, or self-cast Righteous Fire. I'm probably still just going to like make some type of totem build. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet because everything seems so trash, but if I do decide on a build like and have it finalized before Friday, well, I will have it finalized before Friday, but I mean if I have it finalized a decent amount in advance, I'll let you guys know what I'm going to be doing. But yeah, everything just seems kind of garbage right now, and I'm trying to just basically pick something that's like least garbage, or and it is at least somewhat fun, because I just hate playing SRS, so I'm probably not going to play SRS. But yeah, so just kind of a negative video here, I guess, but it is what it is. So just leave your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. And I think I'm going to upload a Shockwave Totem video a bit later in the day. And that hopefully looks promising, so I'm going to test that out a bit more. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do Freezing Pulse. I'm not sure, but talk to you guys later.